In a small diner nestled along Route 67 in a quiet Midwestern town, life had fallen into a comfortable rhythm for Amy Chen, a hardworking waitress whose gentle smile had become a familiar sight to regular customers. At 26, she carried herself with quiet determination, her neat uniform complemented by a small name tag that caught the fluorescent lights as she moved between tables. But these days, her movements were more measured, careful. She was 5 months pregnant, and though she tried to hide her exhaustion, the long hours on her feet were beginning to take their toll. The Golden Cup Diner wasn't fancy, but it was clean and honest, much like the town itself. Chrome and red vinyl booths lined the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee and grilled onions perpetually hung in the air. For Amy, it had been more than just a workplace for the past 3 years. It was where she'd found her footing after moving to town, where she'd made friends among the regular customers and her fellow waitresses, and where she now relied on the steady income to prepare for her baby's arrival. Her brother Kevin was stationed overseas with the Army's 82nd Airborne Division. Before deploying, he had made her promise to call if she ever needed anything. But Amy was proud and independent, traits they both inherited from their immigrant parents who had taught them the value of hard work and resilience. She hadn't told Kevin about her pregnancy yet, or about her boyfriend walking out when he learned the news. Some burdens, she decided, were hers to bear alone. The trouble began on a humid Tuesday afternoon when the rumble of motorcycles shook the diner's large front windows. The sound alone was enough to make conversation pause as 8 bikes pulled into the parking lot. Their riders, wearing leather vests adorned with patches, filed into the diner with the confident swagger of men used to commanding attention. "Seat yourselves anywhere," Amy called out professionally, though something in their demeanor made her instinctively wary. They chose the booth section, spreading across 3 tables in her area. As she approached with menus, their leader, a heavy-set man with a graying beard and arms covered in faded tattoos, looked her up and down with unconcealed disdain. "Well, look what we got here, boys," he drawled, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Guess they'll hire anyone these days." A few of his companions snickered, while others pointedly ignored the menus Amy was trying to distribute. Amy felt her cheeks flush but kept her voice steady. "Can I start you gentlemen off with some drinks?" The next hour became an exercise in endurance. Every request was accompanied by a snide comment about her appearance or heritage. They demanded frequent refills, spilled drinks accidentally, and made crude jokes about her pregnancy. Other customers watched uncomfortably, but no one intervened. The diner's owner, Mr. Patterson, was out sick, and the cook was too busy to leave the kitchen. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called out as she passed with a coffee pot. "Bet you don't even know who the daddy is, do you?" The comment was followed by cruel laughter that seemed to fill the entire diner. Amy's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee at another table, but she refused to let them see how much their words hurt. She thought of her parents, who had faced far worse when they first arrived in America, and how they had taught her to hold her head high. She thought of her brother Kevin, who would be furious if he knew how these men were treating his sister, and drew strength from the memory of his protective nature. The situation escalated when one of the bikers stuck out his foot as Amy walked past with a tray of food. She saw the movement just in time and managed to step over it, but the man grabbed her arm, causing her to stumble. The tray wavered but didn't fall, and Amy quickly pulled away from his grip. "Take your hands off me," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the now silent diner. "I don't care who you are or what you think of me, but you will not touch me." The biker stood up, towering over her. "Or what, sweetheart? What's a little thing like you gonna do about it?" Before Amy could respond, the diner's door chimed. Through it walked a young man in army fatigues, his bearing straight and purposeful. Amy's heart leaped. It was impossible, Kevin was supposed to be thousands of miles away. But as the soldier moved closer, she realized it wasn't her brother at all, but someone else, someone who had just happened to stop by the diner at this precise moment. The soldier, who couldn't have been more than 25, took in the scene with a quick glance. His eyes moved from Amy's obvious distress to the group of bikers, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He walked to the counter and sat down, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Ma'am," he called out to Amy, his voice carrying clearly through the tense atmosphere. "Could I get a coffee when you have a moment?" Amy nodded gratefully and moved toward the counter, away from the bikers. As she poured his coffee, her hands still shaking slightly, the soldier spoke quietly. "Are these men bothering you?" "It's nothing I can't handle," Amy whispered back, but her voice betrayed her anxiety. The soldier nodded once, his eyes never leaving his coffee cup. "My name's David. I've got a sister about your age. She's a nurse in Cincinnati." He paused, then added, "I couldn't help but notice you're expecting. My sister just had her first baby last month." The simple, human conversation helped steady Amy's nerves. Behind them, the bikers had grown louder, emboldened by alcohol and their own sense of intimidation. They were making a game of trying to get her attention, calling out increasingly offensive remarks. David's hand tightened around his coffee cup, but his voice remained calm. "I've got some friends who'd be interested in meeting these gentlemen. They're stationed at the base just outside town. Would you like me to give them a call?" Before Amy could respond, the leader of the bikers shouted across the diner. "Hey, princess! We're waiting on our check. Unless you're too good to serve paying customers now." Amy straightened her shoulders, drew a deep breath, and turned to face whatever came next. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would mark the beginning of a story that would soon spread throughout the small town, a story about standing up to bullies, about unexpected allies, and about the kind of courage that doesn't always wear a uniform. David watched as Amy approached the bikers' tables with their checks, his military training evident in his alert posture. He'd already sent a quick text message, though Amy hadn't noticed. The diner had grown uncomfortably quiet, with the few remaining customers paying their bills and leaving quickly, sensing the growing tension in the air. The biker gang's leader made a show of examining his bill, then crumpled it up and tossed it onto the floor. "Oops," he sneered, earning chuckles from his companions. "Guess you'll have to pick that up." Amy stood her ground, her voice remarkably steady. "Sir, I'll bring you another copy of your bill. But I need to remind you that this is a family establishment, and your behavior today has been unacceptable." The leader's face darkened. "Listen here, you little..." Before he could finish, the diner's door chimed again. This time, 3 more servicemen in fatigues walked in, their presence immediately commanding attention. They were clearly friends of David's, responding to his message. The tallest of them, a broad-shouldered man with a serious expression, spoke first. "Everything all right in here, David?" David stood up from his counter seat, casually adjusting his uniform. "Just having some coffee, Sergeant Reynolds. Though I think these gentlemen were just about to apologize to the lady." The biker gang's demeanor shifted subtly. While they still outnumbered the soldiers, there was something about the servicemen's quiet confidence that gave them pause. The leader, however, wasn't ready to back down. "We don't take orders from you boys," he growled, standing up to his full height. "This ain't your business." "Actually, it is," David replied calmly. "See, this diner is a regular spot for our unit. Mrs. Patterson, the owner's wife, always saves us breakfast after our morning drills. And we take care of our own." As if on cue, Amy's phone began to ring. She pulled it from her pocket, and her eyes widened at the caller ID. With trembling fingers, she answered. "Kevin?" The voice on the other end was clear enough that several people could hear it. "Hey sis, surprise. I just landed stateside for 2 weeks leave. Why didn't you tell me about the baby? I had to hear it from Mrs. Patterson when I called the diner looking for you." Amy's eyes filled with tears. "Kevin, I didn't want to worry you. You've got enough to deal with over there." Well, I'm here now. Put me on speaker, would you? Amy complied, holding out the phone. Kevin's voice filled the diner, carrying the authority of someone used to commanding respect. I understand there are some gentlemen there giving my sister a hard time. The bikers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Their leader's face had lost some of its color. Yeah, about that, David chimed in, your sister's been handling it with grace, but I think these men owe her an apology. They've been making some pretty inappropriate comments about her condition. There was a dangerous pause on the phone. When Kevin spoke again, his voice was steel wrapped in silk. Is that right? Well, here's what's going to happen. I'm about 20 minutes out from the diner, and those men are going to wait right there until I arrive. Unless they'd prefer to deal with the MPs from the base? I'm sure Sergeant Reynolds and his men would be happy to make that call. The biker gang's leader looked around at his companions, then at the servicemen who now stood at strategic points around the diner. His shoulders slumped slightly. Look, we were just having some fun. No need to make this a federal case. Fun? Kevin's voice crackled through the phone. You call harassing a pregnant woman fun? My pregnant sister? Let me tell you something about my sister. While I've been serving overseas, she's been sending care packages to my entire unit. When one of our guys lost his mom last year, she organized a fundraiser at that diner to help with funeral expenses. She works double shifts to save money for her baby, never complaining, never asking for help. And you thought it would be fun to make her day hell? The silence in the diner was absolute. Amy wiped tears from her eyes, while David and his fellow servicemen maintained their protective positions. The bikers looked increasingly uncomfortable, their earlier bravado evaporating under the combined weight of military presence and brotherly fury. We're sorry, ma'am, one of the younger bikers spoke up suddenly, removing his leather vest. This isn't what we're about. This isn't what our club stands for. He pulled out his wallet and placed several large bills on the table. For the trouble, and the tip we should have given you. The leader shot him an angry look, but more of the bikers followed suit, leaving money on their tables and mumbling apologies. The leader, now isolated by his own men's decent behavior, finally relented. Fine, he grumbled, reaching for his wallet. We were out of line. Won't happen again. He placed a $100 bill on the table. I think you should all leave now, David suggested firmly. Though I'm sure Kevin would still like to have a word with you when he arrives. The bikers filed out quickly, their motorcycle engines roaring to life in the parking lot. As they pulled away, Amy sank into a nearby booth, her hands shaking as the adrenaline began to wear off. Kevin, she spoke into the phone. Are you really coming? Her brother's laugh was warm and reassuring. Already on my way, sis. And we've got a lot to talk about. Starting with why you didn't tell me I'm going to be an uncle. David and his fellow servicemen began straightening up the diner, putting chairs back in place and cleaning up the mess the bikers had left behind. Amy watched them with grateful tears in her eyes, one hand resting protectively over her belly. Thank you, she said softly to David. All of you. I don't know what would have happened if. No thanks needed, ma'am, David replied with a gentle smile. Like I said, we take care of our own. And anyone who serves our country's family is our family too. As the afternoon sun slanted through the diner's windows, Amy began to feel something she hadn't felt in months, truly safe. Her brother was coming home, she had unexpected allies in these honorable servicemen, and for the first time since learning of her pregnancy, she didn't feel alone anymore. Sometimes, she realized, family wasn't just about blood, it was about the people who stood up for you when you needed them most. The 20 minutes waiting for Kevin felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. Amy busied herself brewing fresh coffee for David and his fellow servicemen, who had insisted on staying until her brother arrived. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but her mind was racing with thoughts of how to explain everything to Kevin, the pregnancy, her ex-boyfriend's departure, her decision to keep working despite the doctor's advice to reduce her hours. The familiar rumble of a motorcycle engine made her pause mid-pour. This one was different from the angry growl of the bikers' machines. It was the steady purr of a well-maintained Harley, the same one Kevin had lovingly restored during his last leave. Amy's heart leaped to her throat as she hurried to the diner's entrance. Through the glass door, she watched her brother remove his helmet, his military bearing evident even in this simple action. He looked older than when she'd last seen him 8 months ago, his face more weathered, his eyes carrying the weight of experiences he rarely talked about. But when he saw her through the window, his entire expression softened, and suddenly he was just her big brother again. Kevin strode into the diner, covering the distance between them in 3 long steps. He hesitated for just a moment, taking in her appearance and the visible curve of her pregnancy, before pulling her into a careful but firm embrace. "You stubborn little dragon," he murmured, using their mother's old nickname for Amy's determined nature. "Why didn't you tell me?" Amy buried her face in his shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of leather and his favorite aftershave. "I didn't want you to worry. You have enough to deal with over there." Kevin pulled back, holding her at arm's length to look her in the eyes. "That's not how this works, and you know it. We're family. Your problems are my problems, remember?" David and his fellow servicemen had moved to a corner booth, giving the siblings space while maintaining their protective presence. Kevin noticed them and straightened, offering a respectful nod. "Thank you for looking out for my sister," he said, his voice carrying the weight of sincere gratitude. "Just did what anyone would do," David replied modestly. "Your sister showed more courage than those troublemakers expected." Kevin's jaw tightened at the reminder of the bikers' behavior. "About that, which way did they head?" "No," Amy said firmly, tugging on his arm. "They're not worth it. Besides, I need you here, not out chasing after them." The determined look in her eyes, so like their mother's, made Kevin relent. He allowed Amy to guide him to a booth, where she finally sat down, the events of the day catching up with her. One of the diner's other waitresses, Jenny, quietly brought over a glass of water and some crackers, patting Amy's shoulder supportively. "Start from the beginning," Kevin said gently. "Tell me everything." And so Amy did. She told him about meeting Tom at the community college where she took night classes, about his charm and seeming reliability. She described the shock of discovering her pregnancy, and the even greater shock of Tom's reaction, his suggestion that taking care of it would be easier, his rapid transformation from boyfriend to stranger when she refused. Her voice trembled as she recounted the weeks of morning sickness while working double shifts, the careful budgeting of every penny, the late-night fears about raising a child alone. Kevin listened without interrupting, but Amy could see the muscles in his jaw working, could read the protective fury in his eyes. When she finished, he reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "You never were. And you won't be going forward." "Kevin, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm telling. I've got 2 weeks of leave, and I've already called my CO about extending it. I've got accumulated leave time I haven't used, and there's a position opening up at the base here for my MOS. I was going to surprise you with the news that I'm transferring closer to home, but you beat me to the surprises department." Amy's eyes widened. "You're coming home? But your career will continue just fine from here," Kevin finished. "The Army's big on family values, remember? And right now, my family needs me." David, who had overheard this part of the conversation, spoke up from his booth. "The position he's talking about is with our unit. We'd be lucky to have him." A wave of emotion swept over Amy, relief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the realization that while she'd been trying so hard to be strong on her own, there had been a support system waiting to catch her if she just reached out. "There's more," Kevin continued, his expression softening. "Mom and Dad, they know about the baby. Amy's hand flew to her mouth. You told them? They called me last week, worried because you hadn't been answering their Sunday calls lately. Mom knew something was up, you know how she is. They're not angry, Amy. They want to help. Dad's already talking about converting their home office into a nursery for when you visit. Tears spilled down Amy's cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were tears of relief rather than worry. Their parents had emigrated to America with nothing but hope and determination, building a life through endless hard work and unwavering family bonds. They had raised their children to be strong and independent, yes, but also to know that true strength sometimes meant accepting help when it was offered. The afternoon light was growing golden, casting long shadows across the diner's checkerboard floor. David and his fellow servicemen finally prepared to leave, each stopping to shake Kevin's hand and give Amy their best wishes. Jenny had already started closing duties, humming quietly as she wiped down tables. First thing tomorrow, Kevin said, his tone leaving no room for argument, we're going to look for a bigger apartment for you. Something closer to the base, with a proper nursery. Kevin, I can't afford. We can afford it, he corrected. I've got savings, and the housing allowance from the new position will help. Plus, Dad already offered to help with the deposit. Amy opened her mouth to protest again, but Kevin held up his hand. Remember what Mom always says? A dragon can fly alone, but a family of dragons soars higher. The Chinese proverb, one of their mother's favorites, brought a fresh wave of tears to Amy's eyes. She had been trying so hard to fly alone, not realizing that her family had been waiting with open wings all along. As the sun set outside the diner's windows, brother and sister sat together, planning for a future that suddenly seemed much brighter than before. The day's earlier ugliness had given way to something beautiful, a reminder that sometimes life's hardest moments were just the prelude to its greatest blessings. The next morning dawned bright and clear, bringing with it a sense of new beginnings. Amy woke up to the smell of brewing coffee and the sound of Kevin moving around in her small apartment's kitchen. For a moment, she lay in bed, letting the events of the previous day wash over her. It felt almost like a dream, but the rumble of her brother's voice as he spoke on the phone in the other room confirmed its reality. Yes, sir, I understand, Kevin was saying. We'll be there at 10. He paused, listening. Thank you, Chief. This means a lot. Amy emerged from her bedroom to find Kevin had not only made coffee but had also picked up fresh bagels from the corner bakery. He was still in his workout clothes, having clearly gone for an early morning run. Some military habits never changed. Who was that on the phone? She asked, gratefully accepting the cup of decaf he handed her. Her doctor had been very clear about caffeine limits during pregnancy. Police Chief Rodriguez, Kevin replied, his expression serious. Those bikers from yesterday? Turns out they've been causing trouble up and down the state. The chief wants to talk to us about filing a formal complaint. They've already got reports from 3 other establishments. Amy's hand trembled slightly, causing ripples in her coffee. I don't know, Kevin. Maybe we should just let it go. Hey, Kevin said softly, sitting across from her at the small kitchen table. I know you're worried about making waves. But this isn't just about you anymore. What if the next person they intimidate isn't lucky enough to have someone step in? What if they decide to target another pregnant woman, or someone elderly, or someone who can't defend themselves? His words struck a chord. Amy thought about her unborn child, about the world she wanted them to grow up in. Would she want her child to stay quiet in the face of bullying? The answer came to her immediately, no, she would want them to stand up for what's right. Okay, she nodded. We'll talk to the chief. The police station was a modest brick building in the heart of downtown. Chief Rodriguez, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and kind eyes, greeted them personally. To Amy's surprise, David was there too, along with 2 other customers from the diner who had witnessed the incident. Thank you all for coming in, the chief began, once they were settled in her office. "We've been building a case against this particular group for several months. They call themselves the Road Warriors, but they're nothing more than bullies who've been harassing small businesses and individuals across 3 counties." She spread several photographs across her desk, security camera stills showing the same group of bikers at different locations. In each image, they were clearly intimidating someone: a young gas station attendant, an elderly shop owner, a teenage waitress. "The problem has been getting people to come forward," Chief Rodriguez continued. "Most folks are too frightened to file formal complaints. But with your statements, combined with the evidence we already have." She was interrupted by a knock at her door. A young officer poked his head in. "Chief, you're going to want to see this. We just got a call from Highway Patrol." The chief excused herself for a few minutes. When she returned, there was a grim satisfaction in her expression. "It seems our friends from the Road Warriors had an interesting morning. They tried their usual intimidation tactics at a truck stop about 50 miles north. Unfortunately for them, the truck stop happened to be hosting a breakfast meeting of retired Marines." Kevin couldn't suppress a smile. "How'd that work out for them?" "Let's just say they're currently explaining their recent activities to state troopers. And they're being very cooperative." The chief turned to Amy. "Your willingness to stand up to them yesterday, combined with the intervention of our military friends here, started a domino effect. After you stayed strong, other victims started calling in. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be intimidated to inspire others to come forward." As they left the police station 2 hours later, after giving their official statements, Amy felt lighter somehow. The morning sickness that had plagued her early pregnancy had given way to a different kind of queasiness lately, one born of worry and stress. But now, that too seemed to be lifting. "Ready for part 2 of today's mission?" Kevin asked as they walked to his motorcycle. Amy raised an eyebrow. "There's more? Apartment hunting, remember? I've got 3 places lined up to look at. All near the base, all with good security, and all within our budget. The first apartment was too dark. The second was perfect but already rented. The third, however, made Amy's heart skip a beat. It was on the 2nd floor of a well-maintained building, with a small balcony overlooking a community garden. The complex had a gym, a pool, and, most importantly, was full of military families. The couple downstairs both serve at the base, the property manager explained. The building has a real community feel. We do monthly cookouts, holiday celebrations, and there's always someone around if you need help." Amy wandered into what would be the nursery, imagining the ways she could decorate it. Sunlight streamed through a large window, and she could already picture a rocking chair in the corner, a crib under the window. "We'll take it," Kevin said firmly, watching his sister's face. He had always been able to read her expressions, ever since they were kids. That evening, sitting on the floor of her current apartment surrounded by moving boxes Kevin had picked up, Amy finally felt ready to make the call she'd been avoiding. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Mama," she said softly when her mother answered. "I'm sorry I haven't called lately. I have something to tell you." Her mother's voice, warm and familiar, brought fresh tears to her eyes. "What does Xiaolong?" her mother said, "my little dragon. We already know. And we are so proud of how brave you've been. But now it's time to let your family help you fly." As Amy talked with her mother, Kevin quietly unpacked kitchen boxes, occasionally wiping his own eyes when he thought his sister wasn't looking. The sun was setting outside, casting a warm glow through the windows, and for the first time in months, the future didn't seem scary anymore. It felt full of possibility, of love, of family. The baby kicked, as if sensing its mother's contentment, and Amy placed a hand on her belly. She had been so focused on being strong, on proving she could handle everything alone, that she'd forgotten the most important lesson her parents had taught them: true strength isn't about standing alone, it's about knowing when to lean on the people who love you. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Amy's new apartment had transformed from an empty space into a real home, thanks to the unexpected support that seemed to pour in from all directions. The military community had rallied around her in ways she never could have imagined, proving that family wasn't always about blood relations. On a sunny Saturday morning, Amy stood in the nursery, surrounded by the results of yesterday's surprise baby shower, an event organized by the wives of Kevin's unit. The room that had been empty just days ago now held a beautiful white crib, a gift from her parents, a comfortable rocking chair, from Kevin, and dozens of thoughtful presents from her new neighbors and friends. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find David standing there, looking slightly nervous, holding what appeared to be a handmade wooden toy box. "The guys in the unit got together in the workshop," he explained, carefully bringing the box inside. "We thought the baby might need somewhere special to keep all those new toys." Amy ran her hand over the smooth surface, noting the intricate dragon design carved into the lid, a nod to her Chinese heritage. "It's beautiful," she whispered, fighting back tears. These pregnancy hormones made everything more emotional. "There's something else," David said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out an envelope. "The diner's regulars, well, we all got together and..." Inside the envelope, Amy found a check that made her gasp. It was enough to cover 3 months of rent. "We can't accept this," she started, but David held up his hand. "It's not charity," he said firmly. "It's community. Remember all those times you stayed late to serve us coffee during our study sessions? Or how you memorized everyone's orders and dietary restrictions? Or the fundraiser you organized for Private Johnson's mom? This is just us returning the favor." Before Amy could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Kevin, "Turn on the local news now." David helped her find the remote, and they switched on the small TV in the living room. The news anchor was mid-sentence. "Following a 3-month investigation, the motorcycle gang known as the Road Warriors has been connected to a series of extortion attempts across the state. 15 members of the group were arrested this morning." The screen showed footage of the bikers who had harassed Amy being led away in handcuffs. But what caught her attention was the interview with a familiar face, the young biker who had been the first to apologize and leave money on the table that day at the diner. "I couldn't be part of it anymore," he was saying to the reporter. "Watching them harass a pregnant waitress, it was the last straw. That's not who I wanted to be. She stood up to us with such dignity, and then those soldiers stepped in. It made me realize we were the cowards, not the people we were trying to intimidate." Amy sank onto her couch, one hand instinctively going to her belly where the baby was kicking vigorously. David sat quietly beside her, offering silent support as they watched the rest of the news report. The story shifted to interviews with other victims who had come forward, each mentioning how hearing about the pregnant waitress who stood her ground had given them the courage to speak up. The domino effect Chief Rodriguez had mentioned had turned into an avalanche. "You did that," David said softly. "Your courage changed things for a lot of people." Amy shook her head. "I was terrified that day." "That wasn't courage. Being scared and acting anyway? That's the definition of courage." A new text from Kevin lit up her phone, "Coming over with lunch. Got some news." 20 minutes later, Kevin arrived with bags of takeout from their favorite Chinese restaurant, including the sweet and sour soup Amy had been craving all week. David excused himself to give the siblings privacy, but Amy insisted he stay. "Your family now too," she said simply, and the genuine smile that lit up his face made her heart skip a beat. As they shared containers of food, Kevin shared his news. "The transfer came through officially. I'm permanently assigned to the base here. And..." He paused, building suspense. "Mom and Dad are moving too." Amy nearly choked on her soup. "What?" "Dad's company is opening a branch office here, and they offered him the chance to run it. They're buying a house just 10 minutes from your apartment. Mom's already talking about coming over every day to help with the baby. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by this news, as she might have a few weeks ago, Amy felt a profound sense of relief and joy. Her parents, who had worked so hard to build a life in America, who had raised their children to be strong and independent, were now choosing to uproot their comfortable life to be closer to their children and grandchild. "There's one more thing," Kevin said, exchanging a glance with David. "The owner of the Golden Cup Diner, Mr. Patterson? He's retiring." Amy's heart sank. The diner had been her safe haven for so long. "So it's closing?" "Actually," David interjected, "he's selling it to someone who promises to keep all the current staff and maintain it as a family restaurant." Kevin grinned. "Would you like to know who bought it?" Amy looked between the two men, noting their matching expressions of barely contained excitement. "Remember Uncle Chen? Dad's brother who owns that successful restaurant chain on the West Coast? He's expanding to our area, and he wants to keep the diner exactly as it is, just with some upgraded equipment and a few traditional Chinese dishes added to the menu. And..." Kevin paused dramatically, "he wants you to manage it." The room seemed to spin slightly. "Me? But I don't have any management experience." "You have 3 years of experience keeping that place running smoothly," Kevin countered. "Plus a business degree you've been working on at night school." Uncle Chen said, and I quote, "Who better to run a family restaurant than family?" As the implications of all these changes sank in, Amy felt tears rolling down her cheeks again. But these weren't the tears of worry and loneliness she'd grown used to over the past months. These were tears of gratitude, of joy, of overwhelming love for the family she had by blood and the family she had found. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Amy smiled through her tears. "Your timing is perfect, little one," she whispered. "You're arriving just when our family is getting bigger and stronger than ever." The afternoon sun painted the apartment in warm light, and as Amy looked around at her brother and David, at the evidence of community support surrounding her, at the messages of love and encouragement lighting up her phone, she finally understood what her mother had meant about dragons flying together. Sometimes life's greatest challenges weren't meant to test our ability to stand alone, but to remind us of the strength we find in standing together. The transformation of the Golden Cup Diner was subtle but significant. Under Uncle Chen's ownership and Amy's management, the beloved local establishment retained its warm, welcoming atmosphere while embracing positive changes. The chrome fixtures gleamed a little brighter, the menu expanded thoughtfully, and the regular customers couldn't stop raving about the new fusion specials that bridged American diner classics with traditional Chinese comfort food. 1 month into her new role as manager, Amy stood behind the counter, reviewing the day's receipts with a satisfaction she'd never expected to feel. Her mother sat at the counter, skillfully folding dumplings for tomorrow's specials while chatting with regular customers. The sight of her there, sharing stories and laughter with the diner's patrons, made Amy's heart full. The bell above the door chimed, and Kevin walked in with David and several other servicemen from their unit. They'd just finished their morning training and, as usual, headed straight to their favorite booth. Amy watched as David's eyes found hers, his smile warming her from across the room. They'd been spending more time together lately, though neither had put a label on what was developing between them. "Your father called," her mother said in Mandarin, her hands never stopping their skilled movements with the dumpling wrappers. "The new house is almost ready. We can move in next week." Amy nodded, making a note to help them with the move. The house her parents had chosen was perfect, close enough for frequent visits but not so close as to overwhelm. Her mother had already claimed one of the spare rooms as a dedicated space for the baby. "Speaking of moving," Kevin said, approaching the counter after settling his unit at their usual spot, "David mentioned something interesting at training today." Amy tried to keep her expression neutral, though her heart skipped a beat at David's name. "Oh. The apartment next to his is opening up." Two-bedroom, better view than yours, and closer to both the diner and the base. He watched his sister's face carefully. Just thought you might want to know. Before Amy could respond, the diner's door chimed again. This time, a familiar face walked in, the young biker who had been the first to apologize that fateful day. He looked different now, wearing regular clothes instead of leather, his bearing more confident but humbler. The diner fell quiet, conversations pausing as people recognized him from the news coverage of the Road Warrior's arrests. Amy straightened, one hand instinctively going to her now prominent baby bump, but she didn't feel afraid. "Ms. Chen," he said, stopping a respectful distance from the counter. "I hope it's okay that I came by. I wanted to apologize again, properly this time." Amy studied him for a moment. Kevin had moved closer protectively, and she could see David and the other servicemen watching alertly from their booth. But something in the young man's expression told her this visit was genuine. "What's your name?" she asked. "Mike," he replied. "Mike Turner. I've been doing some counseling since everything happened. Trying to figure out why I let myself get caught up with people like that, why I went along with things I knew were wrong." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I also wanted to give you this." Inside the envelope was a check, a sizable one. "It's my share of the money we took from other businesses," Mike explained. "The police helped us track down everyone we hurt, to make restitution. But what happened here was different. You showed me there was another way. A better way." Amy looked at the check, then back at Mike. "Keep it," she said firmly. "Use it to continue your counseling, or to help others who need to find a better path." Mike's eyes welled up. "I don't deserve your kindness." "Everyone deserves a chance to change," Amy replied, thinking of her own transformation over the past months, from someone trying to handle everything alone to someone who had learned the strength of community and family. Her mother, who had been quietly observing, spoke up in her accented English. "You like dumplings? Sit. I teach you how to fold them." The tension in the diner broke as Mike found himself being guided to a seat at the counter, her mother demonstrating the precise way to crimp the edges of the dumpling wrappers. Soon, he was awkwardly but earnestly trying to copy her technique, while regular customers offered good-natured advice. David appeared at Amy's side, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Better than okay," she replied, watching as her mother patiently corrected Mike's dumpling folding technique. I think this is exactly what healing looks like." The afternoon unfolded in an unexpected but beautiful way. Mike stayed for several hours, learning to fold dumplings, sharing his story with those who asked, and listening to others' stories in return. The diner, which had once been a scene of intimidation and fear, had transformed into a place of redemption and connection. As the day wound down, David helped Amy with the closing duties, something he'd taken to doing regularly. "So," he said casually, wiping down the counter, "Kevin mentioned the apartment?" Amy felt her cheeks warm. "He might have said something about it. It's a good building," David continued. "Safe neighborhood, great community. And..." He hesitated, then pushed forward, "It would be nice to have you closer." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Amy felt the last pieces of her new life falling into place. She thought about how far she'd come from that frightening day, from a waitress trying to face down bullies alone to a successful business manager surrounded by love and support. Her baby would be born into this web of connection and care, with a family that extended far beyond blood relations. "I'll think about it," she said, but her smile gave away her answer. Later that night, as Amy sat in her rocking chair looking out at the community garden below, she felt the baby move and placed her hand on her belly. "You're going to have so many people looking out for you," she whispered. "A grandmother who'll teach you to make dumplings, an uncle who'll move mountains to protect you, a community that stands together, and maybe..." She thought of David's smile, "maybe even more family than we expected." Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Dragon daughter, your father and I are proud of you. Today you showed that true strength is not in defeating enemies, but in helping them find a better path." Amy smiled, tears of gratitude filling her eyes. The night was warm and full of possibilities, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely, utterly at home, not just in her apartment or the diner, but in the life she was building, in the family she was born to and the family she had found, in the person she had become. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, the Golden Cup Diner was more crowded than it had ever been. The occasion? A very special baby shower, though not the traditional kind. This was a community celebration that brought together all the threads of Amy's journey over the past months. The diner had been transformed. Paper lanterns in soft pink and gold hung from the ceiling, a touch of Chinese tradition mixed with modern style. Every booth was filled with familiar faces, servicemen from the base, regular customers, neighbors from Amy's apartment complex, and even Mike, who had become something of a regular himself, often stopping by to help with odd jobs around the diner. Amy sat in a place of honor at the counter, now 8 months pregnant, watching as her mother orchestrated the festivities with practiced grace. The menu for the day was a beautiful fusion of cultures, plates of dumplings served alongside classic American comfort food, symbolizing the bridge between traditions that the diner had become known for. "Your uncle would be proud," her father said, gesturing at the thriving business around them. In the months since taking over management, Amy had not only maintained the diner's warm, welcoming atmosphere but had enhanced it, creating a place where different communities came together naturally. Kevin appeared at her side, carrying a mysterious large package. "Special delivery," he announced, setting it carefully on the counter. "This one's from the whole unit." Amy unwrapped it to find a beautiful handmade mobile for the baby's crib. Each piece was a carefully crafted wooden animal, dragons intermingled with eagles, representing both her Chinese heritage and her American military family. "David made the dragons himself," Kevin mentioned casually, watching his sister's face soften at the mention of David's name. The relationship between Amy and David had blossomed slowly and naturally over the past months, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. Speaking of David, he was currently engaged in an animated conversation with Amy's father near the kitchen, both men gesturing enthusiastically over what appeared to be building plans. They had been spending more time together lately, especially since Amy had decided to take the apartment next to David's, a move that was scheduled for next week. The bell above the diner's door chimed, and Chief Rodriguez walked in, carrying a gift bag and wearing a broad smile. "I hope I'm not too late," she said, making her way to Amy. "Had to finish up some paperwork first." The chief had become another regular at the diner, often stopping by for coffee and updates. Thanks to the domino effect started by Amy's stand against the Road Warriors, law enforcement had successfully dismantled several other criminal organizations that had been terrorizing small businesses in the region. "You're just in time," Amy assured her, making room at the counter. "Mom's about to bring out the special soup she's been cooking all morning." As if on cue, her mother emerged from the kitchen carrying a large pot of traditional Chinese chicken soup, known for its healing and strengthening properties. The aroma filled the diner, bringing conversations to a temporary halt as everyone breathed in appreciatively. "First bowl for the mother-to-be," her mother announced proudly, ladling the soup with practiced care. "For strength and wisdom in the journey ahead." As Amy sipped the familiar, comforting flavor, she looked around at the gathered crowd. Mike was helping serve food, his transformation from troubled biker to valued community member complete. The servicemen from Kevin's unit were sharing stories and laughter with the regular customers. Her father was still deep in conversation with David, while her mother moved through the crowd ensuring everyone was well-fed and comfortable. David caught her eye across the room and made his way over. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, taking the seat next to her. "Grateful," Amy replied honestly. "I never imagined my life could be like this." He took her hand, a gesture that felt as natural as breathing now. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small envelope from his pocket. It's not exactly a baby shower gift, more of a question. Inside the envelope was a key, a copy of the key to his apartment. I know you're moving in next door next week, he said, his voice carrying a hint of nervousness that made Amy's heart flutter. But I thought maybe, eventually, you might want to use this too. Before Amy could respond, she felt a strong kick from the baby. Laughing, she placed David's hand on her belly so he could feel it too. I think that's a yes, she said softly. The afternoon continued with more gifts, more food, and more shared stories. The diner, which had once been a place of fear and confrontation, had transformed into a sanctuary of hope and connection. The very booth where the bikers had sat was now occupied by a group of veterans sharing meals with their families, their children coloring on paper placemats while their parents chatted. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows through the diner's windows, Kevin stood and gently tapped his glass for attention. I'd like to make a toast, he announced, his voice carrying easily through the crowded space. A few months ago, my stubborn little sister tried to handle everything on her own. She thought being strong meant standing alone. He looked at Amy with eyes full of pride and love. But then life taught us all a lesson about true strength. It showed us that real courage isn't about facing challenges alone, it's about being brave enough to let others stand with you. He raised his glass higher. To Amy and her baby, who brought this community together. To new beginnings, new family, and the knowledge that none of us ever has to face life's battles alone. To Amy, the crowd echoed, and Amy felt tears of joy sliding down her cheeks as David squeezed her hand. Later that night, after the celebration had wound down and the last guests had left, Amy stood in the quiet diner with her family. Her mother was packaging leftover food for her to take home, while her father and Kevin discussed the logistics of next week's move. David had stayed to help with cleanup, though he kept getting distracted by checking the baby book someone had gifted them. Looking around at this scene of domestic tranquility, Amy remembered the frightened, lonely woman she had been just a few months ago. That woman could never have imagined this future, one filled with love, support, and endless possibilities. The baby kicked again, and Amy smiled, placing her hand on her belly. You're already so loved, little one, she whispered. And you're going to help us write the next chapter of this story. As the night wrapped around the diner like a warm blanket, Amy Chen stood surrounded by her past, present, and future, the family she was born to, the family she had found, and the family she was building. The journey hadn't been easy, but every step had led her exactly where she needed to be. In the end, it wasn't just a story about a protective brother or a pregnant waitress standing up to bullies. It was a story about community, about redemption, about the kind of courage that comes from knowing you're not alone. But most of all, it was a story about love, the kind that builds bridges, heals wounds, and creates families in all their beautiful, unexpected forms.